Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We are continuing on with our qa'idah that al-adl is obligatory in all things and fadl is recommended. We are providing evidence for this qa'idah. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَأَقْسِطُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ, and be just, have adl, because Allah loves those who are just. Likewise him saying, وَإِنْ أَعْقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. If you are attacked, then you attack back just like you were attacked. But if you keep patient, then this is better for those who are patient. Similarly, وَجَزَاءُ سَيِّئَةٍ سَيِّئَةٌ مِثْلُهَا فَمَنْ عَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. The reward of an evil is an evil like thereof, but whoever foregoes and rectifies the affair, then his reward is guaranteed from Allah. Notice the restriction here when it comes to forgiving. Forgiving is only praiseworthy when it leads to a rectification of affairs. It is not praiseworthy when it will not lead to a rectification of affairs. So if a person is a persistent criminal, then forgiving him will not lead to a rectification of affairs because he'll just repeat the crime. Or for example, if the family of the victim want revenge, then forgiving the perpetrator will not lead to a rectification of affairs because the family of the murdered victim will not have their rights secured for them. This is not islah, a rectification of affairs. This is fasad, this is corruption. But when it comes to genuine mistakes, then forgiveness is recommended. For example, a car accident and someone dies. This is clearly an incident of accidental murder. Here you are well within your rights to forgive him. But if it is someone who does not care about the highway code and he's a reckless driver, then in a case like this, forgiveness is not in its rightful place. This type of person rather should be punished with a heavy blood money and also some ta'zir punishment for not obeying the highway code and being reckless. In a case of qisas, if you take like revenge, then this will be adl, but if you forgive them, then this would be fadl. What about a situation where person A attacks person B and he rips his clothes? Can person B retaliate back by ripping person A's clothes? But the point here is that the clothes vary greatly in their value and quality. If the attacker, person A, is wearing high quality clothes, very expensive ones, and the victim, person B, was wearing cheap quality clothes, then can person B retaliate against person A? Some scholars would say no, because this would not be qisas, equal for equal, like for like. Other scholars would say it would depend on the ijtihad of the hakim, because it could be that the hakim feels this is not a case of financial value. Rather, this is a case of giving admonition to the people. So just like person A humiliated person B, so person B should be allowed to humiliate person A, not looking at the differences of the value of the clothes. In a qisas situation, if it is feared that the victim may overdo the punishment and seek to take personal revenge rather than implement justice, then we can appoint a wakil to do the job on his behalf. For example, the victim gets slapped, and he has every right then to slap the perpetrator back, but he may slap the perpetrator back too excessively to satisfy his personal grudge or sense of revenge. Now you're not allowed to give back in punishment more than you took in a qisas situation, so therefore we can appoint a wakil. Likewise, when it comes to taking back your debt which is owed to you, if you take back the debt, this is adl, but if you forego it completely, then this is fadl. As Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us, وَأَن تَصَدَّقُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. And for you to give sadaqah, meaning overlook the debt which is due to you, this is better for you if you knew. So this would be the fadl which you give to your debtor. Also Allah Jalla wa Ala allows you to mix your food with the food of the orphan if you are in charge of the orphan in a just way. He says, وَإِن تُخَالِطُوهُمْ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ الْمُفْسِدَ مِنَ الْمُصْلِحِ. But if you mix in with them, then they are your brothers, meaning the yatim are your brothers, and Allah knows the one who wants corruption from the one who wants rectification of affairs. However, this example which the Shaykh mentions would probably fit better under the qa'idah that the difficulty would procure ease, because if the orphan is eating food and this is from the wealth of the orphan and he has it in a separate plate and you have your food from your own personal wealth in a separate plate, then this could cause some annoyance and inconvenience. So Allah tells us that if you just share your food all in one container, then certainly this would be easier, and Allah Jalla wa Ala has allowed it. So He's removed this mashaqqa or this difficulty from us. The evidence for qisas, which is of course adl, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا أَنَّ النَّفْسَ بِالنَّفْسِ وَالْعَيْنَ بِالْعَيْنِ وَالْأَنْفَ بِالْأَنْفِ وَالْأُذُنَ بِالْأُذُنِ وَالسِّنَّ بِالسِّنِّ وَالْجُرُوحَ قِصَاص. We ordained on them, in it, meaning in the Torah, life for a life, eye for an eye, nose for a nose, ear for an ear, tooth for a tooth, and all injuries to be repaid likewise. So this is adl, it's justice. It also happens to be al-musawa, equality, because the eye for an eye is equal for equal, and hand for a hand is equal for equal, so right hand for right hand, left hand for left hand, and so on. Likewise, the health of the hand, so the healthy hand to be taken for the healthy hand, not the unhealthy or paralyzed hand. So here with qisas we have a case of justice, but also it happens to coincide with equality. But Allah Jalla wa Ala says, as He goes on in the ayah of Surah Al-Ma'idah, فَمَنْ تَصَدَّقَ بِهِ فَهُوَ كَفَّارَةٌ لَهُ. But whoever does not take the qisas, then this injury of his would serve as a kafara, or an extinguishing for his sins for him. So this would be the fadl when you do not undertake the qisas. And a life for a life would be that even if a sane person was to kill a mad person, the sane person would be liable for the death penalty, because it's a life for a life situation. A mad person may well be mad, but he is still living. The exception to this rule is that a Muslim is not to be killed for killing a kafir. And this is due to the great difference of kufr and iman. Of course, we could be faced with a tricky situation when it comes to equality here. If the perpetrator has one eye only, and he destroys the eye of the victim, but the victim has two eyes, so the victim has one eye left, would we take the eye of the perpetrator? So let us suppose the perpetrator has only the right eye. The victim has two eyes, and the perpetrator takes the victim's right eye. So the victim now only has his one eye, which is the left eye. Would we now, through qisas, take the perpetrator's right eye? The Zahiriyya say yes, because eye for an eye, that's it, simple as that. Majority of the scholars say no, because if we did take the perpetrator's right eye, it would basically mean the perpetrator now is completely blind, whereas the victim can still see, because you can still see the world around you with one eye. In this case, the majority say that the perpetrator would have to pay for the blood money of taking one eye. However, what if it becomes known that this perpetrator deliberately took out the eye of the victim, knowing that his eye would not be taken out? So it was not a case of them having a fight, and it so happens that he takes the victim's right eye. No, rather, he set out deliberately to take the victim's right eye because he knows that through the Sharia law, his right eye would not be taken out. So there's this added element of evil here, a nefarious intention. In a case like this, we can take his right eye, due to this added nefarious intention which he had. If we reverse the roles, a two-eyed perpetrator takes the right eye of a one-eyed victim who only had his right eye. Now what's actually happened here is that the perpetrator has not simply taken just the right eye, such that he could be due the blood money for the right eye, or the qisas for the right eye. Rather, he has taken away the whole of the vision of this person. Now in a case like this, for us to simply take the right eye of the perpetrator would simply not be justice, because the victim is totally blinded. So would we now take both eyes of the perpetrator? But that would not be justice either, because the perpetrator only took away one eye from his victim. So how can we take away his two eyes? So in a case like this, a middle ground would be that we take his right eye, just like he took the victim's right eye, and for the left eye he pays the full blood money. This is an opinion from the ulama. Also, when it comes to the juruh, the injuries, then yes, like for like, but if it is feared that we will not be able to take the injury on the perpetrator in a like for like manner, then we would have to resort to the blood money. And also from the examples, whoever wrongs you, then you can wrong them back in a similar fashion. Allah says, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء إلا من ظلم. Allah does not like for your voices to be raised with negative or evil speech, except for the one who has been wronged. So for example, if you are owed some money, and this person, your debtor, is not paying you back the money, so you can talk behind his back and tell other people that this person is untrustworthy. Normally this would not be allowed, but here, because you have been wronged, you can openly proclaim this. And if somebody abuses you, you can abuse him back. And if somebody is guilty of backbiting against you, then you can backbite against him. But it must be similar for similar, so you must not overstep the limit. As in the hadith, al-mustabbani ma qala fa'ala al-badi'i ma lam ya'tadi al-mazlum. the two people abusing each other, then the sin is upon the one who started it, as long as the one who is oppressed does not give back in revenge more than he took. However, he does give you this right to do that, and this would be adl. But he also gives you another option, which is al-fadl, where he says in Surah Fussilat, لا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة. The good and the evil are not equal. ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. Repel the evil with the good. Then in that case, the one between you and him there was enmity will become to you as if he was your ally and close friend. Notice here that when somebody is your enemy or when he is your friend, this is a matter of the heart. It depends which way his heart is turned. And so the one who turns the hearts, Allah Jalla wa Ala is telling us that if you repel the evil with that which is good, so he treats you in a vile manner but you treat him in a gentle and kind manner, then he will become your close friend. Allah Jalla wa Ala, the turner of the hearts, is telling us, because Allah Jalla wa Ala knows what turns the hearts. Also from the examples which we can give, when it comes to acts of ibadah, if you just restrict yourself to that which is obligatory, then this will be adl, but you can make fadl by doing more than what is required, by doing all the recommended actions, and that's straightforward enough to understand. Okay, now we move on to the qaida number 17. من تعجل شيئا قبل أوانه عوقب بحرمانه. Whoever seeks to hasten something before its proper time, then he is to be punished by being deprived of that which he sought to hasten. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ ضَلَّ ضَلَالًا مُبِينًا. It is not for a believing male or female that when Allah and His Messenger have decreed a matter, that they should have any choice in the affair, and whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger, then he has gone into plain error. The ayah is telling us that we are not allowed to take the matter into our own hands. The problem with trying to hasten something before its own time, or before the proper time which the Sharia has decreed, is hastening the matter and trying to take control of the matter into your own hands. There are many examples of this. A famous example is the inheritance. If you have a rich father, let's say, and if he dies, you were to take his money. If you were to kill him then, in order to take his money, then you will be deprived of any inheritance. Of course, if you kill your father with due right, then you will inherit from him, and there is no difference of opinion here. However, if you kill your father without due right, but it was intentionally done, then in this case you will be deprived of your inheritance. Let us suppose we have three brothers. The eldest kills the youngest intentionally. The elder brother now is not entitled to inherit from the youngest brother, but the middle brother is. However, if the middle brother decides to kill the older brother in qisas, then is the middle brother entitled to inherit from the older brother? The answer is yes, because this killing was with due right. We could also have an accidental killing, and in this there is a difference of opinion. Some scholars say, again, you don't inherit. Others say, you do inherit. An example of this would be a car accident. If you are driving a car and you crash, and it is your fault, and the passenger, who happens to be your brother, dies, you accidentally killed him, but you do inherit from his wealth. The better opinion is that he does inherit. However, he will not inherit the blood money, so the blood money needs to be paid, and this will be taken out from his wealth, and it will not be returned to his wealth when he inherits the money from the deceased. So if you imagine this example, you have two sons. One is a righteous son to his father, and the other one is a disobedient and evil son. If the righteous son is driving a car with the father as a passenger, he is involved in an accident. It is the son's fault. If we say the accidental killing prevents the inheritance, then what this means is that all the wealth of the father will go to the disobedient son, and nothing of it will be left for the obedient son. And just the thought alone doesn't sit very well. However, if we go with the weightier opinion, then both of the sons get to inherit. It's a similar case where a man makes a bequest for another person that after I die, such and such amount of my money will go to this person. So if the Musa lahu kills the Musi, then the Musa lahu does not receive the bequest. Similar to this, if the Mudabbar servant kills his master, then his tadbir becomes null and void. So now he's no longer set to be free after the death of the master, because he sought to hasten the hukum or the ruling before its proper time. Similar to this, if a man divorces his wife in an illness in which death is feared for him, then she will still inherit from him, even if her iddah period ended. Notice this. And also from the examples of this qa'idah is the one who seeks to hasten the goodness of this world will be deprived of it in the hereafter. Allah says, وَيَوْمَ يُعْرَضُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا عَلَى النَّارِ أَذْهَبْتُمْ طَيِّبَاتِكُمْ فِي حَيَاتِكُمُ الدُّنْيَا وَاسْتَمْتَعْتُمْ بِهَا. On the day when the kuffar will be placed before the fire, it will be said, you used up all your good things in this life and you enjoyed them. فَالْيَوْمَ تُجَزَوْنَ عَذَابَ الْهُونِ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَسْتَكْبِرُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَبِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَفْسُقُونَ. So today you are punished with a humiliating torment because you used to be too proud on the earth without due right, and you used to commit sins. Likewise, we have the hadith about the one who wears silk from the men in this world will not wear silk in the hereafter, and whoever drinks the intoxicants of khamr will not drink the khamr of the hereafter. Does this mean that such a person who wears silk or drinks khamr will not enter Jannah? Or will he enter Jannah but will be deprived of these ni'am? The second opinion seems more viable, because even though these are major sins, but they're not kufr. So therefore, if it is not kufr, then you have to enter Jannah at some point in your afterlife. Let us now move on to qa'idah number 18. تضمن المثليات بمثلها والمتقومات بقيمتها. When you have to pay back something which you can pay back a similar item, then a similar item must be paid back. But if you're unable to pay back a similar item, then the value of the item which is destroyed must be paid back. Okay, so with the mithliyat, we're talking about things which, if you destroy them, a particular item, let's say, you can purchase a similar item to pay back the owner. These are the mithliyat. But what are the mithliyat? Some scholars say that they are those items which can be measured using the kail, meaning the sa' and the mud, and also that which can be weighed, so grams and kilograms and so on. They say these are the only items which are mithliyat. And the mutaqawwamat, those goods to which a value can be assigned, is anything other than the mithliyat. So in this qa'idah we are talking about when items belonging to someone else or wealth belonging to someone else is destroyed and you have to pay back. About the mithliyat we have another opinion. It simply says any item which has a similar item to it. So you can purchase a similar item to the one which you destroyed. And no doubt this is the correct opinion, because we know the Prophet ﷺ borrowed a camel, and he gave back a camel which is better than the one he borrowed, because he could not find a camel similar to the one he borrowed. Also, we know from the hadith where Aisha, she got jealous when one of the wives of the Prophet sent a plate of food to the Prophet. She knocked the plate over, thus breaking it, and the Prophet ordered that a similar plate be paid back. And he said, Ina'un bi ina', ta'amun bi ta'am. Plate for a plate, food for food. So if you destroy any wealth, as long as it is possible to find something similar to repay, then this is what you must do. And the evidence, as you have heard from the hadith. So let us suppose you break somebody's cup. Do you have to pay back the value of the cup in money, or do you have to pay back a similar cup? The answer is you must pay back a similar cup. If it is not possible to pay back a similar item, then you have to resort to the value of the item. Let us suppose you are unable to find a similar item to that which you have broken through your ta'addi or tafriq, if you are an ameen. Here you would have to pay back the value of the item in money or in cash or whatever the currency is. Or it could be that you do find an item which is similar to the one you've broken, but this similar item costs far too much more than the item that you have broken. So in a case like this, it would be unfair for you to purchase that similar item and pay it back, because in this there would be a clear harm on you financially. Thus, in a case like this, you would pay back the value of the item you have broken. Okay, on to qa'idah number 19. إِذَا تَعَذَّرَ الْمُسَمَّى رُجِعَ إِلَى الْقِيمَةِ. If it is not possible to give a price to an item, then we need to resort to its valuation. So we need to know here that an item can have a price but also a value. The price of the item would be how much money the seller is selling this item for. But this does not have to be the value of the item, because the value of the item is the general price of the item in the market. Now that particular seller may be selling it for less than its normal value or more than its normal value. And this is quite normal, you see this every day. So if we have a sales transaction and it is not possible for us to know at which price the product was sold, so now we don't know how much was this item sold for. So in a case where it is not possible for us to find out, then we would have to resort to the market value of the item. And this is the price we would give it, because this is the most sensible thing which we can do right now in our situation. So for example, a man sells 1 sa of wheat to another person, and this person, the buyer, consumes the wheat, and it is not possible for us to know at which price the wheat was sold, this 1 sa of wheat. The price was known before, but now it has been forgotten, and we have no way of finding out. Of course, the price had to have been known before, because one of the conditions for the sales to be correct is that the price must be known. So of course the sales contract went ahead and the price would have been known, otherwise the sale in and of itself would be fasid, corrupt. But it's afterwards now which we are talking about. The price has been forgotten and it is not possible to know what the price was. And both the buyer and the seller have forgotten, nobody wrote it down. So both the buyer and the seller, they both say, I don't know how much we traded this wheat for, this 1 sa of wheat. So what do we do in a case like this? How much does the buyer need to pay the seller? Well, we resort to the value of this item in the market. And as long as the market exists for this particular item, then the market value therefore would have to exist. What we do not say is that the buyer must return the item to the seller. No, because we are sure that a transferal of ownership took place. That much we know. So we cannot reverse that now. We have to stick with it. So we would not tell the buyer that you need to purchase another sa of wheat and deliver it to the seller who sold you the first sa of wheat. So this would be like the mithliyat which we spoke about in the previous qaida. No, we would not do this in this case, because we're not talking about somebody's wealth being destroyed here. We are talking about a valid sales transaction which is binding. And the value which we look at is the value of this item at the time of the sales contract, not the value of the item now, because the market value could change with the changing times. Likewise, we can say, coming under this qaida, that if it is not possible to find out the ujra, the money you pay for the worker, then we would resort to how much a worker of this sort is normally given in the customs. So the ujra, or the wages of the worker, let's say somebody building for you, this wage was known before, but now both parties have forgotten it. As for if the wages were unknown from the very beginning, then this whole contract would be fasid, because the whole point about a sales transaction, or when you purchase services from someone, let's say a builder or a painter, decorator, and so on, the whole point here for the transaction to be correct is that the price or the wages must be known. This is from the basic rules and conditions. Similarly, if the price paid to the worker was something which is haram, or for example, in the price there was some jahala or ignorance, then again we resort to what a worker of his sort would be given customarily for his type of work. And similarly, if the mahr of a woman is unknown, then we would give this woman what women of her type would customarily receive. However, one may argue here, if the price of the item or the service is something which is haram, let's say wine or whatever, then the contract itself would be invalid, and hence the item must be returned. If a worker works for you and you agree to pay him in a price which is haram, let's say dead meat or wine or something of the like, then you would not be allowed to pay him in this haram price, of course, and we would have to resort to what the worker of his type would ordinarily receive in the customs, as long as of course his work is halal, such as building, painting, decorating. Qaida number 20. إذا تعذر معرفة من له الحق جعل كالمعدوم. If it is not possible to know who the owner of the wealth is, then he is treated as being non-present or non-existent. So in our qaida here, we know that this item of wealth belongs to someone else, but we don't know who that someone else is, and it is not possible for us to find out, and we have given up hope. So we would treat the owner of the wealth as if he does not exist. But then what do we do with the wealth? We would give it in charity on behalf of the owner. And coming under this qaida is when we find a lost item, and it is not possible for us to know who the owner is. After the finder of the lost item has announced it, then he has most right to this item. Also, if a man goes missing and we don't have any news of him, now he has left behind wealth, what happens to this wealth? Well, we leave it to the ijtihad of the Imam. When the Imam gives his ruling that he will declare this man to be officially dead, then at that point the wealth of that man who is missing will be divided out amongst his inheritors. How long do we wait before adjudging this man to be dead? Like we said, this is down to the ijtihad of the Imam, and this is the most sensible opinion to take in a case like this, because the amount of time to wait could vary depending on the varying circumstances and details surrounding the case. Or if you have somebody else's wealth as a deposit which he left with you, or a rahn which he gave you, which is a pledge in a sales contract, or perhaps you usurped some wealth from him, and if you don't know who this person is or where he is, and it's impossible for you to give this wealth back to him or back to his inheritors, then you can either give it to the Baytul Mal, the treasury, or you could give it in charity on his behalf. And if the owner of the wealth was to return, then he would have a choice. Either he can acknowledge your charity on his behalf, which is fine then, or he could ask you to pay him back. And whoever dies and he does not have any inheritors, or his inheritors are unknown, then the wealth goes to the Baytul Mal, who will then spend this wealth for the general benefit of the people. And now on to Qaida number 21. الغرر والميسر محرم في المعاوضات والمغالبات. Ignorance and gambling are haram in cases of exchanging wealth and cases of competition. Actually, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says that when it comes to financial transactions, then there are three factors which would make it haram. These three factors are al-dhulm, oppression, and riba comes under this, as in the statement of Allah, فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. Then you would have your capital or original wealth. You will not oppress, neither will you be oppressed, because riba is oppression, it is dhulm. So dhulm is the first haram element. The second haram element is al-gharar, which is simply when you are unsure of what you will receive, or that you will receive something but you're unsure what it will look like. So there's this element of jeopardy and risk and uncertainty. So jeopardy, risk, uncertainty, all of this is gharar. And the third element is maisir, is gambling, where one person gains at the other's expense, and this gain is based on chance. Khamr and maisir are mentioned together in the Quran because they incite enmity and rivalry and hatred between the people, and they also, due to their addictive nature, divert people from the remembrance of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So they would divert you from making dhikr of Allah, from performing salah, from reciting the Quran, from attending circles of knowledge, and all of these beneficial activities, they would divert you from them. Why? Because of their addictive nature. As for the hatred and enmity which they cause, then yes, of course, with gambling, one person gains at the other's expense. Naturally, this will lead to a feeling of enmity and hatred, because this other guy got his one-up over me. This is what the average person will feel. Khamr, no surprises, it takes away the intellect, it removes your inhibitions, and if that's the case, then you can do pretty much anything you feel like. So with maisir, which is gambling, also known as qimar, which is gambling, it is a contract where one person is going to gain and the other one would necessarily lose. In a normal sales contract, both people gain. It's called maisir from yusr, which means ease, because it's easy to gain what you are gaining, as opposed to a sales contract. Because when it comes to purchasing and selling, then this requires effort. Whereas if your national lottery ticket has the winning number, then you have millions coming your way without any effort on your part. And also from the gambling is the insurance which we have, like car insurance and home insurance and all types of insurances. This is gambling, because either you're going to win or you're going to lose, and the winner wins at the other's expense. Now, it is well known that in some countries it is obligatory under the law to have car insurance. In this case, there is nothing much you can do about that, and you are forced to take out the car insurance. But that does not remove the original ruling. The asl on this issue is that it is haram. So one does need to bear that in mind. So even if you do have to take out insurance, you still must have in your heart the belief that this is haram. But it has become a halal only in your particular case of necessity. and that you're only doing this because you're forced to do so. So it's not like you're doing this out of the love for doing it. Does this belief of yours that the insurance is haram have any effect on real life? The answer is yes, because if you believe that this is haram in its asl, then let us suppose you paid £1,000 to your insurance company and you suffer damages worth £1,500. Now if the insurance company covers the cost, which is £1,500, then it means that you have profited £500. Well, that extra £500 would not be permissible for you to take and profit from. Rather, you can only take from their services the value of £1,000 because that is what you gave them. As for if you take any more, then you would be just like the gambler who has made a profit at the other's expense. If we look at it the other way around, you pay them £1,000 and you do not suffer any damage, and the insurance company does not have to pay anything. Now what's happened here is that the insurance company has profited from you £1,000. Now in a case like this, it means that the insurance company has oppressed you, and so they are the wrongdoers, not you. So the sin lies on them, not you. So now then you see that your belief has an effect on how you will act. What about al-khamr? Al-khamr is everything which clouds your intellect by way of pleasure. So this then does not include anesthetics, which you could receive in hospitals for operations. Definitely it takes away the intellect, but it is not by way of pleasure. As for khamr, then is it najis or tahir? Well, the stronger opinion is that it is tahir. So if you have some of it on your clothes, then you still can pray. And we know when it was made haram, the people poured the khamr into the streets. And if it was najis, you would not be allowed to do that, because if you pour something in the streets, then other people will be affected by it. You wouldn't pour urine in the streets, for example. It is najis. As for the statement of Allah that the khamr is rijusum min amal shaitan, it is an impurity from the actions of shaitan, then this is not a physical impurity, it is a spiritual impurity, because your beliefs and actions can also be impure. The evil actions are impure actions, and kufr beliefs are impure beliefs, because the ayah says that it is a rijus, an impurity from the amal, from the actions of shaitan. Now, the actions cannot be physically impure, but they are spiritually impure. As for the gharar and uncertainty, then the Prophet ﷺ in the Sahih forbade the sale which is done by way of throwing stones, and the bay'ul gharar, the transaction in which uncertainty is involved. And from this, for example, selling a servant who has run away. Now a runaway servant, you don't know if you will be able to catch him and deliver him to the buyer. So there's clearly gharar involved here. Uncertainty. You don't know if you're going to receive what you paid for. Likewise with a camel which has run away. Or for example, the animal which is still in the belly of the mother. That animal, you don't know whether it will be alive or dead, what its description will be like. So there is much uncertainty involved here, and there is jeopardy. And if that's the case, then it resembles gambling, because one person can gain at the other's expense. So the animal in the belly of the mother, this will be sold at a lower price due to the uncertainty. If this animal now is delivered dead, then the buyer has lost out and the seller has won. But if the animal is born alive, or perhaps two such animals are born, twins, then the buyer has clearly won at the expense of the seller. Likewise with the runaway camel or the runaway servant, they're likely to be sold for a lower price, and hence the same thing, we would have a case of somebody gaining at the other's expense. Also we find that the gharar, or this uncertainty and jeopardy and risk, can also be found in musharakat, which is company partnerships, and also musaqa, where a person waters the trees for the other, and in return he will have some fruits which come from the tree, or the muzara'a, where a person sows the seeds in a field for another person, and in return he will have some of the crops. So this gharar can be found in these contracts as well. So for example, the owner of the land would say that you will have the fruits or the crops growing in the east part of the land, not in the west part. Clearly this is gharar. The east part may produce heavy amounts of crops, more than what the worker has worked for. Or on the other hand, they may produce a small amount of crops, far less than what the worker has worked for. Or for example, in the musharaka, in the company partnership, if we have, let's say, the mudaraba, the owner of the wealth gives the wealth to the worker who will go out and trade with it, And let's say the owner of the wealth says, you will have the profit from the first year, I will have the profits from the second year. This is not permissible. The first year may produce much profit, and the second year may produce very little profit. Again, this leads to this idea of one person gaining at the other's expense. Rather, we say that the profit must be decided upon, regardless of the year. Or for example, the owner of the wealth says that you will have the profits which accrue from the trade of merchandise A, and I will have the profits which accrue from the sale of merchandise B. This is gambling for the same reason, and it involves gharar. What about delaying the debt which you owe to the seller to an unknown time? So for example, you buy some clothes from the seller and you tell him that I will pay you at a later date, but this later date is unknown. Well, this is impermissible because of the jahala, or the ignorance which is involved here. So if you say, I will pay you back when my friend Zayd returns because he's got the money, he will give me some money and I will pay you. But we do not know when his friend Zayd is going to return from the vacation. So this is impermissible. It could become permissible if you put an upper limit on it. So I'll pay you back within 1 year, let's say. Now you've put an upper limit on it, so you've reduced the uncertainty and the ignorance. However, small amounts of gharar or uncertainty can be allowed. For example, when it comes to those vegetables which grow from the ground, if you were to sell them just like that, part of the vegetable is in the ground, so it's unknown, it's uncertain as to its quality. But this is allowed because the gharar involved here is small, and a small amount of gharar can be overlooked. Because if we did not overlook it, then it does lead to difficulty and inconvenience in life. If you buy oranges, let's say, you don't know how the orange will be from the inside. Will it be sweet tasting or sour? There is always some element of a gharar which is involved, and we have to overlook this. Otherwise it leads to unnecessary inconvenience. But the gharar which we're talking about, which is the haram type, is the major type of gharar. Okay, what about this? A poor person buys some merchandise and he says that I'll pay you back when I have the money. And he does not have the money right now, he is poor. So the time for paying back is definitely unknown. Is this permissible? Well, here actually this is permissible. We have justification and evidence. As for the evidence, we have the narration in which a merchant came from Sham and he has some clothes. And so Aisha says to the Prophet, why don't we buy some clothes from this man and we'll pay him back when we have the money? And the Prophet agreed to this. He sent somebody to purchase some clothes and they'll pay him back when they have the money, but the man refused. This narration is authentic in the Sunan. But the shahid is that the Prophet agreed that they will buy the clothes and pay him back when they have the money. So it is permissible, and that's the evidence from the text. We can also reason it out. We can say that the whole point about the sales contract is that the buyer is going to pay you back when he has the money, and that you're not allowed to demand your money from him when he does not have it. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَإِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. And if he is in straitened circumstances financially, then you must give him respite up until a time when it is easy for him to pay. So this is the whole requirement of the sales transaction, is that you only demand money from him when he has the money, because this is a debt which he owes you, and you're not allowed to demand your debt until he has the money. You must give him respite. This is wajib. So in stipulating this condition that I will pay you for your goods when I have the money, you have not stipulated any condition which negates the requirement of the sales contract. And likewise, not just business transactions but also competitions, gharar and maisir are not allowed in competitions either. So let us say, for example, you're playing a board game and everybody puts in some money and the winner of the board game is going to take the pot. So this is clearly gambling and it is impermissible. There are some types of games which are haram to be played even without gambling, such as chess, which has been mentioned, and also dice games. As for playing with dice, which is nard, the Prophet said that this is the type of person who puts his hands in the flesh of the swine. This hadith is in Sahih Muslim. As for chess, which is shatranj, then we don't have anything specific from the Prophet about this particular game, but Ibn Umar said that this is even worse than nard. But what type of games would be haram then? Ibn Taymiyyah says that the types of games which distract you much from that which is more important in life, then these are haram. We're talking about the types of games in which you could spend hours and hours playing and not even notice the time go by. However, when it comes to competitions, there are exceptions in which gambling can be done. The Prophet ﷺ gave the examples with horse racing, camel racing, and archery competitions, because these three activities are directly jihad activities. And in holding competitions of these sorts, you are training people and encouraging them to practice these jihadi activities. So they will encourage people to train for jihad. And by way of analogy nowadays, we can include modern warfare weaponry, such as fighter jets and tanks, and the advanced forms of guns and rifles and snipers and so on. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah also includes in this knowledge competitions. So gambling can be allowed in even knowledge competitions. And we're talking about the knowledge of the Sharia, because he puts it in the same category as fighting jihad. And what is apparent here is that these types of camel racing and horse racing, even if you do not intend jihad thereby, you can still do it for a prize. Some scholars have said that even though you're allowed to put money in the pot for such competitions, you need to have a muhallil, somebody who would make it halal. In other words, to take the situation out of resembling gambling. So for example, you have two horse races. They each put money in the pot. If we say that the winner takes the whole pot, then this will be gambling. So some scholars said that there needs to be a third participant who does not put any money in the pot. If he wins, he takes the whole pot, but if he loses, he does not lose any money of his own because he has not put anything in the pot. And so with this situation, we remove ourselves from a gambling scenario. But we say in response that there's no evidence for this. Rather, this ruling is an exception to the general rule that you're not allowed to gamble, because of the jihadi fa'idah, or benefit. Okay, now we move to qa'idah number 22 and 23, that contracts of reconciliation are allowed amongst the Muslims, except that sort of contract which would make haram into halal and halal into haram. And also, the Muslims are bound by their conditions which they make, except the conditions which make halal into haram and haram into halal. So from this we find there are two principles, one of the sulh and the other of shurut, conditions which you make between yourselves. And these two principles are directly taken from the hadith, in which the Prophet said exactly that the sulh or reconciliation between the people is permissible, except if they thereby make the halal into haram or haram into halal, and likewise the conditions they make between themselves is all permissible, except if they seek to make the halal into haram or haram into halal. So an example of a sulh would be that a person claims that this particular watch belongs to him, and the watch is physically in the possession of someone else. And the person in whose hand the watch is, he says, okay, if you want this watch, I'll give it to you, but you must pay me £30. And then we can agree to this contract that the watch will be yours. So I will not give it to you unless you give me some money, and then we can be at peace with each other. This type of contract is permissible even if it takes or uses the word of sulh, because it very much resembles a trade contract, not a sulh. On the other hand, the person could deny the claim. So person A says that this watch belongs to me, and the watch is in the hands of person B. Person B says no, it does not belong to you. And so to prevent the argument from becoming worse, they make a sulh contract. Person B says, I'll give you this watch if you can give me a similar watch in return. If they agree to this, then they can go ahead and the matter is resolved. However, in this issue, with regards to the one who is lying, then whatever he takes from the sulh contract is not permissible for him to use in reality from the Sharia standpoint of view, and he will be taken to account for this in the akhirah. But as for where this world is concerned, then the sulh contract itself is permissible and okay, because the one who is lying has taken the wealth without due right, and of course that is not permissible. Or for example, if you have a situation in which the buyer buys an item which he later finds to be defective, he brings it back to the seller and he says, look, I find this item defective. And the seller says, okay, what I will do is that I will reduce the price which I took from you, so I will pay you back some money. So if they do this and they make the reconciliation thereby, then this is permissible. Or for example, in a case of shuf'ah, which is that the partner of a shared property can take his partner's share if his partner sells his share. So let's say person A and B, they own a house, they share in that, and person A sells his share of the house. Person B has most right to buy this. Person C, however, wants to buy person A's share of the house. So now person B and person C enter into a dispute. Person B says, I have most right to buy it. Person C says, no, but I want to buy it. So they make a sulh contract or agreement, and person C says, look, let me buy it, and as a compensation I will give you such and such. Now if they both agree to this, then this is fine. Another example, person A buys a computer for £500. They make a condition that person A, the buyer, will have 3 days within which to return the computer. Now if person B, the seller, decides that he does not want this, he can say, look, I'll tell you what, I'll sell this computer to you for £400, and in return you will not have the choice to return the computer within 3 days. So the khiyar al-shart you would have to drop. So this type of sulh is permissible. You could have a sulh agreement in a case of intentional killing. The relatives of the killed have the right to retaliate, but the perpetrator may say, okay, don't retaliate against me, and in return I'll give you more than the normal blood money. So this type of sulh is permissible because the perpetrator knows that this will be better than losing his life. Or for example, it could be that two people trade with each other, and through the time of the trading, one of these two people, let's call it person A, owes the other one, let's call him person B, some debt. But through the time they've forgotten how much this debt is. So we are sure that person A owes person B the debt, but we are not sure as to how much it is. So they can sit down and make a sulh, an agreement amongst themselves. They'll say that person A will give person B such and such an amount, and will end the matter. Now if they agree to this, then this is fine. We had an example of a sulh with the Prophet ﷺ and his wife Sauda. She was old and the Prophet ﷺ did not want to keep her. So what she said is that you keep me as your wife, but you do not need to spend your night with me. Rather, you can give it to Aisha instead. So what she gains is that she remains as the wife of the Prophet and the mother of the believers, and what she loses is the night she is due to spend with the Prophet. And Allah Jalla wa Ala says about this in Surah An-Nisa, وَإِنِ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا نُشُوزًا أَوْ إِعْرَاضًا فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَنْ يُصْلِحَا بَيْنَهُمَا صُلْحًا وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. If a woman fears maltreatment from her husband or him turning away from her, then there is no sin upon both of them that they make a reconciliation agreement, meaning a sulh, and sulh is better. وَأُحْضِرَتِ الْأَنفُسُ الشُّحْ. But the soul is swayed by greed. وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. But if you do good and have taqwa, then Allah is well aware of that which you do. So Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us that when making the sulh, your own self, your soul, just wants to take and not give. But the way to counteract it is if you do good, ihsan and taqwa. If you can then implement these great qualities, then Allah is well aware of what you are doing and will reward you justly. Notice Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, and sulh is better. So this is general. All types of sulh is better, be it in case of marriage, or in trade, or in intentional murder cases, in anything. A sulh is always better. Similar to this is when Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. And if you hate them, then it could be that you hate something, and Allah puts in it much good. The context is about hating the wife, but Allah uses the word shay'an, something. So it could be that you hate anything, but Allah makes much good in it. So the generality of the wording needs to be looked at here, not the specificity of the context. Similar where Musa a.s. said to the magicians, فَلَمَّا أَلْقَوْا قَالَ مُوسَى مَا جِئْتُمْ بِهِ السِّحْرِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ سَيُبْطِلُهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُصْلِحُ عَمَلَ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. When they threw, Musa said to them, what you have brought is magic. Verily Allah will render it vain. Truly Allah does not set aright the work of the mischief makers. Note the word amal is used here, which means work. He does not use the word magic, even though the specific context is about magic. But the generality is what needs to be noted here, that Allah does not set aright the work of the mischief makers, whether it be magic or other than that. So we need to take notice of the generality of the words in the Quran. Another example of a debt is that, let's suppose, Amr owes Zayd £1,000 to be paid after 1 year. However, Zayd comes to Amr and he says, "Pay me £800 now, and you will not need to pay me £1,000 after the year." If they agree to this, then it is permissible. Some scholars said that this is not permissible because it would be riba, because Zayd has taken £800 for £1,000. It's like saying he's given away his £1,000 which was owed to him, and he's taken £800. So exchanging £1,000 for £800 is impermissible, it is riba. But we say in response that this is permissible because both parties have benefited, whereas with the case of riba, one party benefits. So this is where the dhulm aspect comes into play. But here there is no dhulm because both parties have benefited. Zayd benefits because he gets his debt back now, and Amr benefits because he has to pay back less. So in this particular case of a debt, we would say it is permissible, according to the weightier opinion. And it needs to be noted that the sulh contract, when it is made, it is binding. We cannot say that you can revoke it however and whenever you want, in accordance with your whims and desires, otherwise there would be no point in making the sulh agreement in the very first place. What about the type of sulh which is impermissible? This would be the type of sulh or agreement. You could have a sulh contract in which one person acknowledges that he is the servant of the other person, whereas in fact he is not. Or for example, that a woman acknowledges that she is the wife of another man, whereas in fact she is not. As for the servant example, person A says to person B, "Look, acknowledge that you are my servant, and we can have this documented with the qadi, and in return I'll pay you." And they agree to this, and this is all documented. Then person A sells person B, because he's quote-unquote his servant, for a particular price. And this price, person A and person B will share amongst themselves. This is no doubt haram, and in Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, قال الله تعالى ثلاثة أنا خصمهم يوم القيامة. There are 3 people, I will be their adversary on يوم القيامة. This is what Allah Jalla wa Ala says in the Hadith Qudsi. رجل أعطى بي ثم غدر. A person who makes a contract in my name and then proves to be treacherous. وَرَجُلٌ بَاعَ حُرًّا فَأَكَلَ ثَمَنًا. A person who sells a free person and he consumes the price. وَرَجُلٌ اسْتَأْجَرَ أَجِيرًا فَاسْتَوْفَى مِنْهُ وَلَمْ يُؤْتِ أَجْرًا. A person who hires another, he takes his full services from him, but he does not give him his due wages. As for the wife example, a man says to another woman, "Acknowledge that you are my wife and I will give you some wealth in return." And they acknowledge this. A woman who is not your wife cannot become your wife just like that, out of a sulh contract. Why would they want to do this? Because they may be living in a country in which married couples receive some financial benefit. So this is what is intended here, is the financial benefit, not the benefit of an actual, genuine marriage contract, because he does not want to live with her as a wife. He just wants the financial benefit, and so does she. This type of sulh is certainly a contract of agreement amongst them, but like we say before, the contentment of people only comes after the contentment of Allah and His Messenger.
Let us take a few review questions. Question number 1. If a son intentionally kills his father, does he get to inherit from him? Justify the answer. Question number 2. If a person hires another to work for him, but the wages are something haram, let's say pork, then in that case, how do we solve this situation? And question number 3. What are the 3 elements which would render a contract to be haram? The 3 general elements which Ibn Taymiyyah suggested. State what they are.